Good evening and welcome to the Lowestoft History Sessions, episode 12. We want to say a big warm welcome to you, whether you kind of tune in and watch every session or most sessions, or whether you're watching for the first time. We're broadcasting or live streaming on behalf of the Rogues Shanty Chorus and cross-posting to a couple of other pages as well. And who are the Rogues Shanty Chorus? So we are an authentic fishing choir based in Lowestoft, which is the most easterly town in the UK. I know a lot of people who are watching do know that, but maybe some people who are watching don't. And we celebrate the music of fishermen and seafaring communities through performance and rehearsal and research about sea shanties and maritime theme songs. And we're part of a wider creative arts and learning project called the Unique Coastal Cultural and Musical Heritage of Waveney. And that's how we come to involve ourselves with the wonderful Mr. Ivan Bunn, who is a celebrated author, historian, and we add the word legend in. And we've done 11 sessions with Ivan, where Ivan is sharing his knowledge of Lowestoft, Waveney, Suffolk, East Anglia, and many other aspects as well. And each session tends to have a kind of a theme of its own, or an area or a ward within or nearby to Lowestoft. And this evening is no exception. We have tonight the Changing Oulton Broad, part 1, because Ivan anticipates it's going to take a couple of sessions. And so I guess without further ado, I should bring Ivan on to say hello. Hello, Ivan.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, everyone. Nice to be back again. Another week has flown. We're all ready to go.
Absolutely, yeah. I think so, yeah. I think so. It's still a strange time, isn't it, Ivan?
Very much indeed. Yeah, very much. The heat hasn't helped today. I might, as the evening goes on, I might have to loosen my tie, yeah. I think
you'll be forgiven, Ivan. As we say in Lowestoft, it's warm.
Yeah, it's very.
So there's a couple of comments I'm going to share already. One from Jerry Poole. Hello, Jerry. You always you tune in regularly, so thank you very much. It says, hello there, everyone, from Oulton Broad. Well, tonight is all about Oulton Broad, Jerry. And Terry Unit, I hope I'm saying that right, or Unit, says, hello, evening, everyone. Susan Corkmash says, hello, everyone. So do let us know if you're watching, won't you? Even if you feel like, I always have to comment just to shut him up. It's just useful to know. We can see the numbers, but it's lovely to know if you have any questions for Ivan, or if there's anything you don't quite catch, you'd like him to explain or clarify, or even if you just want to say, hello, look, we're here and we're watching, that would be wonderful. And also, if you could see your way to clicking share as well, that's absolutely brilliant for us too. Just because if you do enjoy these sessions, it just helps maybe other people to enjoy them too. And there's one more comment there from Sue Day. We know Sue very well, one of our Shanty Chorus, and she says, hello, folks. Well, hello, Sue, to you. Oh, and another one, Jackie Draper. Hi, everyone. Sounds great. Looking forward to tonight. So, Ivan, what have you got lined up for us? We know it's about Oulton Broad. I guess.
Yeah, just one little point. Perhaps we should explain, and perhaps people will let us know. We've had one or two problems, not this end, but apparently some of our listeners, watchers, have not complained, but mentioned the fact that they can't hear me too well. My voice is a bit muffled. So we've, with the help of Paul and Stephen, we've changed the mic system at my end, and I'm just hoping, with fingers crossed, that the problem that we had with my other mic is now gone away and you can all hear us. If you still having problems, can you just let us know at some point, and then we'll see if we can figure out what it is.
Well, Ivan, I think we've got an answer to that already. Karen Harris says, I'm listening. Sounds much better this week.
Oh, good. Thanks, Karen. That's worth knowing.
And then Hazel Rumble says, hello from Peterborough. Well, hello to you, Hazel. I'm not sure I've seen your name as watching before. So if it is your first time, big warm welcome to you. And there's 11 more of these that you can watch again. If you need any help to do that, just get in touch. But yeah, big warm welcome to you, Hazel. And yeah, just a few more comments, Ivan, about the sound. Jerry Poole, the sound is brilliant today. Terry says, yes, the sound has been a bit muffled over the last couple of weeks, but Sue says, can hear Ivan fine tonight. So there you go.
Oh, that's good. Looks like we've cracked the problem then.
Boom.
That's very reassuring. Anyway, going back to your question a minute or two back about this evening's talk. Yeah, it is to do with it is a history of Oulton Broad, taken a very, very long view of it, because it wasn't until the early 1900s that a place, i.e. a community and an urban district, was created that was known as Oulton Broad. Really, up until that point, the only place called Oulton Broad was the Broadwater, the lake, the Broad, which is in Oulton, mostly, called Oulton Broad. So if 150 years ago you said to somebody, I'm going to take a walk through Oulton Broad, they would imagine you wading up to your neck in the Broadwater, because there was no place called Oulton Broad. So Oulton Broad is means many things to many people, and the Broadwater itself, one of the most southern of the Norfolk Broads, although we are in Suffolk, so it's one of the Suffolk Broads. It plays a pivotal role in the history of the area. So initially what I'm going to do is look back quite a long way in time and see where and how Oulton Broad, not the town, we're not there yet, how the Broadwater, known as Oulton Broad, or the freshwater as often called, how that came into existence and the role it's played in changing and the history of the whole district. So it's quite a long journey, both in space and time, but hopefully at the end of it, you hopefully have a better idea of the long story. It is a long story, not a boring one, I hope. And I've done it in two parts simply because I don't want to condense it down too much. So you're getting two parts to this, if you can tolerate it. I've done this talk before into one of our sessions at the Seagull. I modified it slightly for tonight, considering we don't have a live audience. But, sorry, excuse me. I hope you enjoy it and find it interesting, possibly even learn one or two things about it. Having said that, and conscious it's going to probably run for at least an hour, whenever... do you know what? I haven't got to loosen my tie.
You do that, Ivan. Look, I haven't even got a tie on at all.
Oh, it's only chance I get to dress up in front of an audience these days since lockdown.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, I'm actually still in lockdown here because my wife is due to go to hospital this week, and we have to have 14 days isolation. So it's not very often I get the chance to put a tie on, but I've taken it off because it's too warm.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. And when everybody's ready, and I hope you all are, I intend to make a start.
We'll proceed, yeah. So just take me a beat or two, Ivan, to share the screen. But in the meantime, and relating to your tie comment, we've had a post from Linda Boyce. She says, "Evening, Stephen and Ivan. Hope it's not too hot for you." Well, it is a little bit, Linda. Sounds fine tonight. Thank you. Okay, so let me. I'm just going to share the screen so I can bring in the projection. Give me a moment, and I'll hand over. And if I get rid of this and then full screen it, there we go.
There we are. Thank you very much. So here we go, folks. Just the introduction, and then we'll get down to the nitty gritty. If I just get a bit more comfortable here. My word, that's warm in here. So as I was saying, I've called it changing Oulton Broad because Oulton Broad was, and probably like most places, always will be changing. And some of the questions I hope I can answer. Some of the rhetorical, some of the actual questions is basically, how has it changed? Why has it changed? And when did it change? But as I said, we're going to start way, way back in time. So here you see a map of our United Kingdom, and the little tiny red dot, just in case you aren't certain if you're living on the other side of the world, that's the location of Oulton Broad, the place that we're talking about tonight. Only a mile or so away from the coast, the rivers and marshes to the west, but it hasn't always been like that. So the first journey we're going to take tonight is a long ways back in time. Hopefully my slides are going to change for me the way I designed them to. So we take a long look back in time. We have to do that to see how the Broads, not just Oulton Broad, but the Norfolk Broads themselves were formed. As you probably know, the Broads are a feature of the land. So here we've gone back now to 10,000 years ago, and this is now a recognized fact that we were joined, this southeast corner of the UK was joined to Europe by a land that's become known as Doggerland. And you can see that 8,000 years BC, the area we know as Oulton Broad and Lowestoft was in actual fact very, very much landlocked. And it's the changes that took place. These changes are now a recognized historical fact. These changes that took place, they carved out the landscape that we know today, modified it, and then man came along and made his changes to it. So if I can ask Stephen just to click me for the next slide. So here we have a view of a schematic view of Dogger land. To the north are the Dogger Hills. That's where the Dogger Bank is today under the North Sea, the much shallower area of the fishing grounds. Then slowly but surely over the eons, the water levels, the sea levels rose. There's lots of interesting theories as to why that is. I'm not even going to go down that path tonight because otherwise we're going to lose sight of Oulton Broad, and we must keep Oulton Broad in our sight. So as you can see, as time passed, the sea levels rose until eventually all of that land that linked us to Europe was covered in water, and the water continued to rise. And as you know, this area of East Anglia, Norfolk and Suffolk, particularly this area, is very, very low lying. And basically it flooded, and it flooded quite deep. So if we go to the next slide, please. This created an area that's now known today as the Great Estuary. By about 2000 BC, about 4,000 years ago, that's where we're located, in case anybody's just wondering, but I'm sure you've sussed it out. Again, it's a historical fact that was a huge estuary stretching all the way up to Norwich. There was the island of Flegg, the island of Loathing Land. We're still on the southern part of the island of Loathing Land. So it's a great estuary. And even by the time of the Roman invasion, when the sea levels beginning to drop a bit, it was still quite a broad estuary. And the sea levels dropped and they continue to recede. If you look at a map, and it's quite interesting to do that, if you look at a map and plot all the churches, you'll see there's not a single medieval church anywhere in that great flooded area, in that great estuary. If you take Oulton, we're talking about Oulton Broad, St Michael's Church at Oulton stands on the top of a steep bank overlooking the marshes. And it's the same all the way around the coast here. Some of the churches have actually been marked on here. So that's a great estuary. As I said, by Roman times, the water was receding. It was still a navigable channel. That's why Borough Castle only has 3 walls, because the fourth wall, the eastern wall of Borough Castle, was in actual fact, the water came right up to the castle at that point, and that's where the wharves and boats would sail. So bearing that in mind, if we just go to the next slide, obviously there's no pictures from that, but this is what the marshes to the east of Oulton would have looked like. The whole Great Estuary would have looked like this huge tidal mud flats with deep channels running through the middle. You get a similar thing to that for people who are local to this area. The flooding marshes at Blythburgh. That's a perfect example of probably the sort of thing that we were seeing. Now, when you get great standing areas of water, tidal or not, you get great layers of mud that settle down, silt. It's known as alluvium. And amongst that as well, because of rotten vegetation and other matter, there are great areas of peat. That's P-E-A-T. And peat was a much sought after commodity back in the early medieval period. So if we just go to the next slide, please. Let's just have a look at a modern map of the area. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And just see the area of alluvium, the area of peat, if you like, that was left behind after the sea levels dropped and the water receded, and left behind marshes, soggy, wet marshes, some of which were drained. So this is a modern map drawn up by the Environment Agency. You can find these on the website. If there was serious flooding at any time due to the rise in sea level rather than heavy rain, this is the area that would be flooded. So you can see it's a tremendously big area with a great arm at the southern end, stretching through modern day Oulton Broad, right through to Lowestoft and out into the sea. So that's the area of flooding of the Great Estuary. Obviously, it doesn't show you the medieval one or 2,000 years ago, because Yarmouth now has such sea defences that it wouldn't get flooded. But Yarmouth is in fact a sandbank at the entrance to the Great Estuary. So here, if we home in on the area that's the subject of my talk tonight, the area around Oulton Broad, and to a certain point Lake Lothing to the east of that, and we again use the Environment Agency's online maps, which are very interesting in actual fact. We can see, we can put the water back, if you like, certainly where it was during the time of the Great Estuary. And remember, underneath all of this water, you've got alluvium, you've got the silts that are building up, you've got the peat beds are being formed. Excuse me one moment. So it's a massive wet area, flooding everywhere. So let's have a look at the alluvial deposits round about the year 1000 AD. So on this map, you can see, I hope, the area of Oulton Broad in the centre, the red wavy line that goes from east to west or west to east is the parish boundary between Oulton and Carlton Colville. My little red arrow that flashes there shows a stream that definitely flowed that way in medieval times. And there is a road there. That's Stangate Way. That's now Galveston Road. So you're coming down Galveston Road, you hit the junction with Normanston Drive, continue along Bridge Road, and you eventually come to Mutford Bridge. I ring that and then continue out towards Beccles, or you could take a left turn the other side of Mutford Bridge, the safe side, and go along Victoria Road. So that's basically the area of alluvium. There are some sort of differences in opinion as to where exactly the name Mutford comes from. Now, as we'll see in a moment, to the north of the parish boundary between Carlton Colville and Oulton, you are actually in the Lothing Land half hundred, and south of that, from Carlton Colville onwards, you are in the Mutford half hundred. So it could well be that simply the Mutford Bridge, as it became known across the cut there, it could be that Mutford Bridge simply means the bridge that took you from Lothing Land into Mutford half hundred. Although it has been suggested that Mutford may, and I'm stressing this, may mean a ford nearing the meeting of streams. And certainly that we know that stream that runs down through Bond's Meadow, if you're familiar with that, from Sands Lane, still runs today through Bond's Meadow, under Caldecott Road, and empties into Oulton Broad. A very, very prolific stream. The watershed is way to the north of Sands Lane. And it could well be that the name actually means the ford near the meeting of streams, from the Anglo-Saxon mutha, meaning the mouth of a river. That's conjectural. Nobody's quite sure. Somehow that argument doesn't really hold together for me, because if it's the meeting of streams, I'm not quite certain where all the other streams were. So that basically is the alluvium deposits circa 1000 AD, by which time we're pretty certain that the people were beginning, well, we know that people were beginning to cut turfs of peat. Peat turfs, just as they do, I think, today in Ireland and some other places. Big soggy squares of turf, we'll see one in a moment, that are dried out and used as fuel in lieu of wood or coal. Very, very important in medieval times. So basically what I'm saying is certainly circa 1000 AD, Oulton Broad, the water called Oulton Broad, the Broadwater, almost certainly didn't exist in any way, shape or form that we know it today. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we need evidence. All historians need evidence. Now, in the 14th reign of Edward III, 1341, he put a tax, nonarum in quaestionis. It was in actual fact a tax of 9% on all commodities produced by any any parish or township in England. I think he needed the money to build ships. They usually do, kings do. And there's a document that lists every single parish and what tax was going to be extracted. And the Joyce Lambert, who was a main contributor to the evidence in the 1950s about the origins of the Broads, in her book, The Making of the Broads, published by the Royal Geographical Society in 1960, she uses this tax return, if you like, as a way of calculating how much peat, how much turfs were cut in this area around the Broads. And so here you can see Oulton, which in actual fact is Oulton, and the Latin is there, and it's contracted Latin, but she's calculated, knowing how much was paid in tax, £15, a hell of a lot of money, and they know what the price of 1,000 turfs would be. She's calculated that the annual output at Oulton in that 1 year, 1341, 300,000 turfs of peat were cut from the area, almost certainly where Oulton Broad is today, where the Broadwater is today. So the evidence is almost irrefutable that all of the Broads were formed from flooded turbaries. Turbaries is a turbary. I do beg your pardon. A turbary is the old name for works where they excavated turfs and peat. So 300,000 turfs were removed from Oulton in the year 1341. There were others were removed from Blunderston, which accounts for Blunderston water, and also Fritton, a smaller one there, but there was a small amount of turfs removed from there as well, which would eventually become Flixton Decoy. So 300,000 turfs, and the turfs are quite big. They're about the size of a small attache case. We'll have a look at a turf at the moment. So we need other evidence as well, because we know that certainly by the 14th, early 15th century, because of the changes in the weather and the rise of sea levels, slowly, perhaps not slowly, but surely, the turbaries, the pits, these deep pits they've been removing turfs from, were flooding. And eventually, it was almost impossible to dig any turfs. But it did continue. We know that in the 17th century Lowestoft, early 17th century Lowestoft, there's one man whose occupation is given as a turf graver. A graver means somebody who digs. He doesn't dig a grave. And he was still digging out turfs, probably somewhere in the Ham at the bottom of Normanston Park. And we know from the parish records of Hopton-on-Sea that right through to the 18th century, they were still digging turfs around the lakes at Hopton. So it's not an unusual thing, but we need to look at, if we can, other evidence, perhaps written evidence of turf cutting in Oulton to dig a big enough hole to form the Broadwater. So if we can go to the next slide. So here is a 19th century picture of a turbary. Huge, the piles and piles of turfs that needed. and then they had to be piled and stacked properly to dry. They're, as I say, they're the size of a small attaché case, probably 18 inches. I don't do metric, I'm sorry, about 18 inches, 18, 20 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 4 or 5 inches thick of really stinking material. So here's a turbary from the 19th century. I think this photograph comes from Ireland. The interesting thing about it is they didn't dig willy-nilly. As this picture here shows, this is Barton Broad. Again, this is from Joyce Lambert, Dr. Joyce Lambert's work in the 1950s. This is Barton Broad, and you can see that the broad is not the same depth all the way over. There are lines of actually peat just below the surface where reeds and rushes can grow. And these are the dams or the bulks that were left between the deep pits. And the reason being is, well, we're not quite certain, or she wasn't quite certain. It seems to be that these were to prevent complete flooding. If one bit got flooded, the next strip wouldn't get flooded because of the dam or the bulk in the way. And also it would be a way of walking out and getting into the pits to do the digging. So, as I said, there's evidence here, physical evidence in Barton Broad, accepted now as showing these bulks or dams that were left when the peat work was at its, the peat digging was at its height. Now, we do have written evidence of this at Oulton. Now, if you could go to the next slide, if I got these in the right order, please. Oh, not quite. No, we'll go there in a moment. So here is an early survey map, plan of loathing land in 1586. The original's in the National Archives. And down at the top left, you can see the town of Lowestoft. Top right, town of Lowestoft. Top left, you can see Great Yarmouth. And right at the bottom right, the little collection of buildings there is Oulton and Oulton Church. And here, not very clearly because it's a bad copy, in actual fact, you can see, you'll have to take my word for it, there's the bridge and there's Mutford Bridge. You can see the road that leads you to Oulton Church, probably either Hall Road or Hall Lane. You can see the road going off to the right from the bridge, taking you to Beccles. Then the fork in the road, the old Stane Gateway, Galston Road, leading you northwards, and the other road leading you to Lowestoft, heading eastwards. That's now Normiston Drive. And the windmill at Oulton, there was a windmill right through to the early 20th century. And we know from documents at the time, or later documents, the Oulton Broad, the water called Oulton Broad, in actual fact, belonged to the Lord of the Manor. The reason being is that in actual fact, before the Broad was flooded, when it was just a low-lying marshy area, before the hole was even dug to take the peat out, he owned all of that land. That was part of his manor. And in later documents, right the way through to the 20th century, when the manorial rights were transferred early in the early 1900s, the manorial rights of Oulton were transferred to Lowestoft Borough Council. Oulton Broad is referred to as being all those 90 acres of land covered in water. So had there always been a natural lake there, as in many other places, then it would have referred to the mere or the lake. But no, they're still referring to the fact that the lord of the manor owns the land now covered in water, and nobody was allowed to touch the mud at the bottom of the Oulton Broad without his permission, because it was his land. So all those 90 acres of land covered in water. If we push on to the next slide. Okay, so I was saying we need some written evidence from Oulton. Very, very few and far between. After Kett's rebellion in 1549, he did a lot of damage around this part of the world. One of his, which army did, they wanted to destroy the manorial rights of the lords of the manor. And the best way to do that would be to destroy the records, the manorial records and documents that recorded these rights of the lords of the manor. And it appears that this was done at Oulton, because in December 1552, after the Kett's rebellion had been quashed, the lords of the manor were trying, by picking the brains of residents, to remember and get them to record what the rights of the lord of the manor were at Oulton, and this is it. And so I'll read that bit out to you if you can't see it too well. This comes from the original Inquisition document. It said, these are the sayings of Richard Mites of Hermollet, the 22nd day of December in the 6th year of the reign of King Edward VI, that's 1552, he being in his deathbed, that's he, not the king, but Richard Mites, he being in his deathbed, been requested by divers, many of the township of Oulton, to declare his true knowledge concerning the commons of the said town, being the age of 72 years now. 72 years, did say in the presence of Robert Jenny Gent, William Chaston, James Beard, and Richard Lynn as followeth. If you could just click me once, please, Stephen. He saith that there was a dam between Harwell's Hill and Whitecast, and by the agreement of the inhabitants of the said dam, now we know these places border present-day Oulton Broad water, the one half of one part of the town and the other by the other part of the in turves. Okay, so the town seems to have been divided into two parts by a dam which was cast, and this is where they cut their turves, where they cut their peat. He's describing the turberies of Oulton Broad, and that turves were dried, the one half upon Harwell's Hill and the other half upon the hill by Crumers. And that at the time he did keep sheep there, and the inhabitants did chide him because his sheep did tread the turves. So not have we got evidence that presumably in the previous century, because he's an old man on his deathbed apparently, but certainly 50, 60 years earlier, he could remember when there was a dam dividing what would become Oulton Broad into two halves, and various people from different parts of the town, from the parish of Oulton, cut turves each side of it, and that they placed their turves to dry, one half upon Harwell's Hill and the other half upon the hill by Crumers. We'll have a look at them in a minute and see. But he, being a shepherd, presumably, got on the wrong side of the people of Oulton, because his sheep started to tread all the turves that were laid out to dry. So there's a very, very tiny but important fragment of evidence that there were indeed turberies where Oulton Broad, the water, now is. So if we can pass on to the next slide, please. Excuse me. Most of the land that was covered in alluvium and peat became common land. That's land that belonged to the lord of the manor, and the ordinary people had the right to cut hay, graze cattle, and what have you. So here, if we look at this map, there's Oulton Broad in the middle, Carlton Colville. Hopefully you can make out exactly where you are. It's the same map that I used earlier. And hopefully the captions will come up to give you some idea of what's where. And also, we'll see where they dug the, where they created the dam. So there's Oulton Broad, the broad water, the fresh water. There's Lake Lothing. To your left, you've got the River Waveney, a private marsh called Alma's Home, Oulton Dyke. I'm working from left to right. There's the Reed Fen. There's presumably at the end of what's now Fisher Row, if you're familiar with the area, there's a crossing across the old dyke called the Stones, which is almost probably a ford. You've got up the hill, Waveney Hill now, where Mancroft's Towers stand. There it's called, the common is called Cromer's. To the southeast of that, you've got the huge marsh called Whitecast. Across from that, diagonally, going north east, you've got Harwell's Hill. The other commons, you've got Bridge Heath by Mutford Bridge. Why not? You've got a long length of common land, fen green, that runs immediately to the south of Hall Road. And if you travel on the railway line from Lowestoft to Norwich, as you go along parallel to Hall Road and look towards Hall Road, you can still see that low-lying, flat, overgrown, wet and boggy area, which is fen green. Then you had the long length of common land stretching all the way up almost to Sands Lane, which now forms the low-lying area of Bonn's Meadow Nature Reserve. And of course, slap bang in the middle of all that, you've got Mutford Bridge. And so we can pretty well say that in the early medieval period, if you came to Mutford Bridge and stood there looking east to where the Broadwater now is, what you would have seen, especially in the summer, it seems likely that not many tours were cut in the winter because of the wet and cold. And it was a summer job. There would have been this huge, dark, smelly hole where turfs were being excavated, and a lot of them. 300,000 a year is a lot. And of course, if we go back to Mr. Meitz's evidence at the Inquisition, he said a dam was cast between Whitecast and Harwell's Hill. Well, Harwell's Hill is almost slap bang in the middle of that map. Whitecast is to the south and west of it. It's Harwell's Hill that some of the inhabitants of Oulton stacked their turfs to dry, and the other half of the parish stacked their turfs on the hill called Cromer's. And there again, that's now Waveney Hill, where Mancroft Towers, etc., now stands. So certainly by the mid-16th century, probably much sooner than that, the whole of this area where the turfs had been once cut were they were in actual fact completely flooded. And we finish up with 90 acres of land now covered in water. So that's basically the layout. And I've managed to find the actual lands that belong to the manor of Fastolf's Hall. And as you can see, they actually go right across the common land, Fen Green, and right down to the edge of what at one time would have been the Turbary, and then after the flooding, the lands are covered in water, but the lands of the manor go right down to them. So certainly there is all the evidence that we need that Oulton Broad, the Broadwater, is in fact a flooded turbary. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So what about Mutford Bridge? Once the area becomes flooded and the small stream that might once have flowed through there becomes a much wider, busier stream, Mutford Bridge starts to become very important. It's a north-south connection. I was told many years ago that when, here you can see Mutford Bridge on this map of 1575, Saxton's map of Suffolk, quite clearly marked. I was told that in Roman times it was very wet and boggy there, that when a new bridge was built in 1827, I'll come on to that in a moment, that they found a crossing point in the buried in mud in there were huge logs laid side by side across the width of the road to make a firm crossing point, a corduroy bridge, if you like, there. But unfortunately, I still haven't found any written evidence of that. But as Staingate Way, Gorston Road, is almost certainly, because of its name, the remains of a Roman road, Stane being the Old English road for stone, and gate means a way or a road. So you've got the Stone Road, which might well have been a Roman road crossing the stream, the river at Mutford Bridge, and that would make sense if that was very low lying and wet there. It would make sense that it was some sort of corduroy road built by the Romans, but I've not seen the actual any primary sources to explain that. So if we move to the next map, please. So what I need to do now is just look at the bigger picture, because this is going to be important as time moves on. So there is the half hundreds of Mutford and Lothing land with all the parishes delineated on them. I hope you can see that quite clearly. And the red line across the middle is the boundary between the two half hundreds. The pink area is the parish of Oulton. And to the east of that, of course, you've got the parish of Lowestoft. Immediately south of Lowestoft, as we've seen in one of the other talks I gave, we've got the ancient little parish of Kirkley. And then the biggest parish of all, immediately south of Oulton and sharing part of the Broadwater with it and sharing part of Mutford Bridge with it, we've got the very large parish of Carlton Colville. The two parishes really that feature mostly in this ongoing story are Oulton and Carlton. So that's the layout. Just bear it in mind as we go through the talk. And again, next week, if you need to refresh it, just go back and have a look, because this is all very important when it comes to the structure and governance of this area. I don't intend to talk about how the area was governed and managed, how the parishes worked tonight. That's the subject of next week's talk. So we go to the next slide, please. So here is an 1803 map showing Mutford Bridge with just two causeways leading up to it and a small bridge going across the cut. We're told March 1555, Mutford Bridge is described as which bridge Catherine Maid did make. Well, John Fastoff, the Lord of the Manor at that time, had a wife, Catherine, so it could be her they're referring to. One of the big problems at Mutford Bridge, even though Lake Lothing, to the east of Mutford Bridge, to the east of the Broadwater, wasn't connected to the sea. It was a freshwater much of the time, with a narrow sandbank separated from the sea. Every time there was extra high tide, onshore winds, gales blowing, the water would rush over the sandbar at Lowestoft. There'd be literally a huge tidal surge up Lake Lothing, and it would wash away Mutford Bridge. And also, it appears at times that there wasn't always a bridge there. It refers here, 1652, in February 1652, the Causeway at Mutford Bridge. It calls it Mutford Bridge, but only refers to a causeway, so possibly there wasn't even a bridge, but it had been dammed across. The causeway at Mutford Bridge was decayed and broken down in consequence of the sea breach at Lowestoft, and made impassable for foot passengers and very dangerous to other. 1681, referring to Mutford Bridge, it's described actually as a dam of earth between 10 and 20 yards broad, secured on the right-hand seaward side with piles of wood to break the fury of the waves. And on the left-hand side runs the fresh water, lower than the salt water. So again, 1681, and obviously the sea had washed away the barrier at Lowestoft, and Lake Lothing wasn't even a fresh water, as it would become again later. It was salt water. And the other side, Oulton Broad, the Broadwater, was fresh water. And interestingly, he says that the fresh water lower than the salt water. Well, of course, we know even today, if you stand on, if you can find a vantage point, that often because of the way the tides flow, the water level in Lake Lothing is actually higher or lower than the water level in Oulton Broad. That's all to do with how long it takes the tide to flow from Great Yarmouth all the way around the rivers and dikes into Oulton Broad. So again, we have evidence of that. It's 14th of December 1717. The sea, in one of those raging tides, forced its way over the isthmus. So by 1717, we've got an isthmus, a strip of land dividing Lake Lothing from the sea. Over the isthmus Lowestoft with such irresistible fury as to carry away Mutford Bridge. That's obviously a very vulnerable point. If we go on to the next slide, please, Tim. So this must be the bridge that had been built at some time to replace a former one. This is a contemporary drawing of Mutford Bridge built in 1760. Obviously, at that time, there was no connection between Oulton Broad, between Lake Lothing and the sea. Oulton Broad's the freshwater. It's a brick arch bridge that you can sail from Lake Lothing underneath into Oulton Broad, and vice versa again. We go to the next slide. So here's some interesting views. Here we're on the north shore of Oulton Broad, of the Broadwater, and we're looking basically south-east. Right in the centre background is the tower of St. Peter's Church in Kirkley. Then you've got the common land of East Heath in front of that. Then you've got Oulton Broad. Then you've got Lake Lothing in front of that. There's Mutford Bridge on your right. Right in slap bang in the middle, where there is, I think, somebody driving cattle. That's present day Bridge Road. And then this side of that, you've got Oulton Broad, the Broadwater. then you've got the north shore of Oulton Broad. So you can see it's a vastly different. And at the time that this was drawn, roughly about 1790, most of the land that you can see on there is in actual fact common land. It's not enclosed agricultural land whatsoever. If we flip to the next slide, please, we quickly go through these. Here's a view now from more or less the same vantage point on the same side, but we're looking further east. We're now looking due east, and under that circle, right in the background, hopefully, you can see the tower of St. Margaret's Church in Lowestoft. If you come forward slightly from that, you can see hidden behind that tall building on the edge of the water, you can see a little farmhouse. That still stands today. That's at the bottom of Holly Road. That's the Hollies today. And the big house in front of that you can see is the first malt house to be built. On the hill in the background is the windmill, a smock mill at the time. That's standing on Bridge Road. It was replaced in the early 1800s by the wonderful Tower Mill that was demolished in the early 20th century. Just put that on there for the time for a moment, just to give you some idea. And then once that disappears, as it has now, come down below the mill, again, you can see what seems to be a cart pulled by mules or probably oxen. That's actually going along Commodore Road, and the building on the extreme right stands approximately where the Commodore Inn Hotel pub stands today. Again, most of the land that you can see there in that picture is common land. Of course, in the foreground, we're on the north shore of Oulton Broad. And again, this is common land. If we go to the next slide in this series. Now, we've crossed onto Commodore Road. And you remember the malt house I mentioned? We're standing to the east of the malt house, looking due west. And there, I've arrowed it because it's not very clear. On the skyline, you can see St. Michael's Church, Oulton. If you cast your eye along the skyline to your left, about halfway between there and the edge of the drawing, you can see nestled amongst the trees, Oulton Hall, sitting a different hall, a much older one, sitting in the same location as Oulton Hall today. And again, there's a trackway with some people. I don't think they're on the trackway. You can see on the extreme right, three little figures standing on some raised ground. That's just in front of them, just below them, you can see the line of a track that's leading you. And again, if your eyes are very good, you can actually see in the far distance by the trees, just the other side of the malt house, you can see a wagon and horses going along that same track. That's Hall Road. And roughly where those people are standing on that raised ground on the extreme right, that is where 100 years later, the Rock Estate would be built. So we go on to the next slide, please. I don't want to take it. We're told that on the 2nd of February 1791, a remarkable tide burst through the defences here at Lowestoft, and once again Mutford Bridge was destroyed. And this is a sketch done at the time showing the site of that wonderful brick, lovely little brick arch bridge, completely gone, and somebody's got a little punt there with ropes, presumably going to ferry people backwards and forth until the bridge is rebuilt. So this is the bridge that was built in 1760. The one that you could see on the other drawings, that's completely washed away in 1791 and has to be replaced. So I think on this, it's difficult. I think we're on the Lake Lothing side here, and we're looking towards where the bridge had once stood before it was washed away in February 1791. We pass on to the next slide, please. So the Commons. In 1801, an Act of Parliament, a private Act of Parliament, drawn up by the important landowners in Carlton, Colville, Oulton and Kirkley, got a private Act of Parliament enabling them to enclose and privatise all of the common land in those three parishes, most of which in actual fact was in Oulton. So the Act of 41st of George III, chapter 62, 1801, came into force. And 2 years later, the Commons were divided up into private land. If we go to the next slide, very briefly, and there's an extract from the actual award, the rules for enclosing the land, very detailed. Again, here's evidence in 1801 when the commissioners were appointed to decide how the land should be divided up. They set up 3 trusts. Small amounts of land were put in the hands of trustees. There was the Carlton Colville Poor Lands, there was the Oulton Poor's Trust, and there was the Kirkley Poor Lands Trust. And the idea of all of them was to let the marshes and lands that were put in the hands of the trustees, to let them, and with the rent, buy cools to give to the poor people. The cools are referred to, and also they're going to buy them cools because according to the commissioners and the Act of Parliament, the poor people had the common right to dig turf from the marshes in Carlton, Colville and Oulton in particular, and they lost that right. And so to compensate for the lack of fuel for their open fires, i.e. no more peat to burn, they could be given issues of coal every year, coal purchase from the rents that arise from those lands. And those poor trusts still exist today. Though they've got an interesting history of their own. But again, those trusts, the 3 different poor trusts, the Poor Lands Trust, they are a direct connection with the enclosure of the Commons, and also beyond that, a direct connection with the right to cut turfs. So go to the next slide, having quickly looked at that. So here we see the map of 1803. This is based on the Enclosure Map in the Lowestoft Record Office, and I've redrawn it and sort of just simplified it a little bit, made it easier to understand. So, and it's quite interesting that one of the bits of Oulton Broad, where the parish boundary divides it, you've got the Broadwater on Oulton Broad, but that little neck of land down where Knight's Creek is Carlton Water. And if you jump forward 35 years, this is how that area has been divided up. That's all the land that was once common land has now been enclosed and sold off either as farmland and for building plots. So you can see that all the houses in Bridge Road and along Victoria Road, particularly at Bridge Road, none of those houses, with the exception of the Park House, Everett's Park, the museum, with the exception of that, which is basically 17th century, none of the houses along Bridge Road, the area that becomes known as Mutford Bridge, can be earlier than 1803 because it was common land and you couldn't build houses on the common land. So that gives you a nice starting point if you happen to own property there along Bridge Road, particularly to the north of Victoria Road. If you own any property there, the route of your title is actually the enclosure ward, when the common land on which your house was built was enclosed and became private land. So that's how the commons were finally extinguished. There is a spin-off from that, but I'm going to come to that next week. The trouble is, the more people move into an area, the more they change it, the more complex the history of the area becomes. But we'll push on with the next slide, please. Acts of Parliament, all over the place, Acts of Parliament. 1827, an Act of Parliament was passed by the application of a load of Norwich businessmen to build a railway from Lowestoft to Reedham. Sorry, I tell a lie. I'm jumping ahead of myself. To build a navigable channel from Lowestoft all the way through. Let me show the map. That's the easiest way. Let's just switch slides here. There we go. The Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company was set up, and the idea was to build a navigable waterway from Lowestoft deep enough and wide enough to take large sailing ships and steamers all the way from Lowestoft through to Reedham to join the river there. That way, bypassing Great Yarmouth, so you didn't have to pay the tolls at Great Yarmouth. So there was the 3-mile cut between St Olave's and Reedham. The old dike at Oulton, at the western end of Oulton Broad, had to be widened and straightened because the narrow, windy dike couldn't take large ships. At Lowestoft, a cut had to be made into the isthmus connecting Oulton Broad, Lake Lothing with the sea, and a harbour built there. And lastly, changes had to be made at Mutford Bridge because the Lake Lothing would become salt water. They didn't want the salt water and the different tides to interfere with the fresh water in Oulton Broad, or vice versa. And so a new bridge had to be built at Mutford Bridge to replace the stone one, the brick one that had replaced the one that got washed away in 1791. A new bridge had to be built there. So the Lowestoft end of it is not really concerned of this talk, except it's the reason lock gates had to be built at Mutford Bridge to make sure the levels basically in Oulton Broad and the rivers and streams feeding it didn't flood away into the North Sea and drastically change everything. So that's the Norwich and Lowestoft navigation. If we go through to the next slide, please. So here's a map of Oulton, and you can see, I hope it should become obvious in a minute, the old wavy dike that I just coloured in blue there. That's the old wavy dike. Very, very narrow, very, very shallow, very, very twisted. There's no way you would get a large steamer or even a large 3-masted brigantine or schooner along there. And so a new cut was made from Oulton Broad, much deeper and much wider, to join up with the old dike at the west end of it. So that's the new cut, as it was called, and totally isolated the old dike, although the parish boundary still follows the course of the old dike today. So you've got the new cut there. If we go on to the next slide. So there's the entrance to Oulton Dyke, to the old Oulton Dyke, as you can see, very reedy, very shallow, very twisty. Here we're at the end of Oulton Broad, looking west, and you can see why the proprietors of the navigation company, why their engineers decided that they had to make a new cut, straight and direct, to bypass that meandering stream, basically. And of course, what we get today, if we could just change slides again, this is the new cut. This is the wide, very wide, deep cut made to bypass the old channel. So that's one of the big changes that were brought about by this Act of Parliament of 1827. We go to the next slide, please. Now there's Mutford Bridge. That's the bridge you can see there that was built to replace the one that got washed away in 1791. And on Monday, the 3rd of September, 1827, work began on building a new bridge and lock gates to separate Oulton Broad permanently from Lake Lothing. And there was a great big regatta that day when the first directors of the navigation company came to Lowestoft. They had a big party. Thousands and thousands of people turned up. There were bands, there was regattas, and with a silver spade, the director of the navigation company cut the first sod of turf from where the new cut was going to be made. And so it's on this day, or the next day, I expect, that work begins on building the new lock and bridge at Mutford Bridge. So we move on to the next slide, please. There is an artist's impression of what the new bridge and lock gates would look like. It was finished on the 5th of November, 1828, and they were officially opened on that date. If you look to the right of this picture, so we're on the Lake Lothing side, looking across into Oulton Broad, and if you look at on the right, that house with the smoking chimney, although I don't know if it's close enough, I'm not so certain if that, I thought at first it might be the original Wherry Inn, but that should be much closer. I'm wondering if that's an actual fact, if the angle is right, that might be actually the Hollies at the bottom of Holly Road. Although that seems as if it's too far away. Perhaps it is meant to be the Wherry Inn, but this is only, in actual fact, this isn't a drawing of the eventual finished bridge. This is an artist's impression of what it's going to be like. But anyway, the new lock and bridge opened on the 5th of November, 1828. So we go on to the next slide, please. So here, based on a drawing from the original plans, I've traced it and just simplified it slightly. This is the old bridge, the causeway from Beccles, and as you can see, interestingly, the south to immediately to the west of the bridge, that little tiny bit is still in Oulton and not in Carlton Colville. The boundary never went down the middle of the bridge. And here is the big change that was made. Again, that the building of all this is a story in itself. Perhaps if we spared long enough, I could do that at some time. But here's the lock gates, the pair of lock gates, this little swing bridge, Lake Lothing at the bottom, Oulton Broad at the top. And there on the right is the Wherry Inn. If we go to the next slide, because I'm going to go off at a slight tangent here, because I'm good at that. In the summer of 1894, the original bridge was replaced, and this appears because we know that the Wherry Hotel you see in the background opened in 1900, and it's there. So this must be post 1900. This is the replacement bridge that was put there in the summer of 1894 to replace the bridge of 1828. I've not really been able to find a decent picture of the first bridge. We move on to the next slide. And there's another view again of the layout of the bridge. Again, this is the second bridge, although it looks as if it's almost a replica of the first bridge. Here is a view from above, probably 1930s, judging by the car, and you can see what a narrow, ungainly little bridge that was. Again, we're looking west towards Oulton Broad and the Broadwater. We change slides again. Again, this has to be, because it's post 1900. Again, this has to be a view across the second bridge that was erected across Mutford Lock, as it became known. This is Mutford Bridge, and again the Wherry Hotel on the left. We pass on again to the next slide. On the 17th of August 1939, a new bridge, one that I'm sure many of you watching tonight are familiar with, was erected to replace the original old narrow bridge, which is in the foreground, well, the remains of which are in the foreground of this, and a completely new flyover was built with the bridge, one that I've gone to visit my grandparents in Oulton Broad in the 1950s and 60s are very familiar with, and I'm sure this is a view that many people are familiar with. 17th of August 1939, £45,000 to build it, and there on the left you can see the remains of the old road that led you eventually across the old bridge and linked up with Bridge Road to the north. I'll just take myself a mouth of water because I'm getting dry. And we move on, and of course, 1992, everything changed completely. This whole new flyover road system was built on the east side over Lake Lothing, always known as the Salt side. The other side, Oulton Broad, was always known, well, certainly by my grandparents and great-parents' generation, as the Salt side and the freshwater side. And of course, today we've got Freshwater Way. But I think there's a nice little touch there that the that sort of Dutch lifting bridge, footbridge that they built, that's approximately in the place of the 1827-28 bridge, just slightly further to the east, but that's roughly the line. So when you walk across there and you get on the road that's leading you down to the boulevard, that you are basically traversing the original road that led you to the original bridge. The Wherry Hotel, bottom left, or left-hand side, it's not at the bottom at all. We go on with that now. We move on, please. So here's the Wherry Inn, as it was known. This picture, this sketch is dated 1874. Nobody's quite certain of the date it was built. I think it's built probably in the late in the late 1820s, possibly. Once the bridge was built in 1828, when that modern swing bridge was put in, wider than the old brick bridge, that meant coaches could travel that way much easier. I think possibly that the original Wherry Inn was built as a coaching inn, very similar originally to the Lady of the Lake on the other side, on the Carlton Colville side. So let's just have a quick look at the Wherry. And we go to the next slide, please. Now, I'm of the opinion that that is the original swing bridge there, because that's the very old Wherry, knocked down in 1898. And so I think in the foreground there, we've got the original 1827-28 Mutford Bridge going over the locks. In the background is the two-story Wherry Inn, Wherry Hotel. And you can see across the dam that this man's name, Mr. George Mason, he was mine host. He took up residence as the landlord of the Wherry Inn in 1873, and he continued for 25 years until his death there in 1898. A real character by all accounts. Again, perhaps I shall do a talk one day of fascinating characters from our local history. But he was apparently a very, very well-loved and well-liked man. And he did a lot for the Wherry. He brought it right up to date there. And if we go to the next slide, here's one of his early adverts that I don't know if you could read it too well. It tells you what he's got there and the fact that he had actually landscaped the gardens not long after he moved in, obviously within a year or two, because 1876, the print below is from 1876, and he talks about these beautiful gardens there. And sorry, excuse me. We should see in a moment if I got it right. Now, here we come. Here's an enlargement from there. This is basically from the front of the Wherry Inn in that's not dated, unfortunately. I can't see the date on there now. I think it is 1876. This is looking out across the Broad. You can see in the distance what would become Everett's Park one day. There's the wonderful placid Broadwater. Yeah.
Butt in, Ivan, because I can see the date. It says 24th of June, 1874.
Can you see it there? That is 1874, isn't it? Thank you very much. I can't see it very clearly on my screen here for some reason. Okay, thank you. There we go.
I'll leave you to
it. Cheers. And you'll see along the bottom, it says the Suffolk Rocheville, Oulton Broad, Lowestoft. And I thought, the Suffolk Rocheville, what does that mean? So I did a little bit of research, and obviously George Mason had decided to really make this his inn upmarket thing. He only moved in 1873. We know that from the records. But in 1874, he landscapes, or the gardens were already landscaped, and he promotes these as the Suffolk Rocheville. I did some research, and if we have a look at my next slide, there we go. And here we are. Here are Rocheville Gardens at Gravesend. Apparently, Rocheville Gardens in the Victorian period became the in place for nice people from London and the suburbs to go to be seen, to walk, to picnic, to listen to concerts and what have you. And it seems to me that Rocheville Gardens were very, very well known as being the in place to be seen down in Kent. And so George Mason, on a much smaller scale, decided to introduce that word and that the inference that his gardens at the Wherry Inn in Oulton were in actual fact comparable with the Rocheville Gardens at Gravesend. He also had a fishing club there, angling. He spent a lot of money importing fish. I'm trying to think what they were now. Black char, I think they were, although I'm not a fisherman, from Germany to stock Oulton Broad with. He started a fishing club there. He hired out boats. And also he was very famous for his Wherry Inn Bowls Club, outside bowls on the green. And if you go to the next slide, I thought you'd like to see, there are people about as well in these things. We haven't seen many people at the moment, but here is the Wherry Inn Bowls team, probably at a match, a wonderful collection of gentlemen there. And we can place exactly where this is. It's the car park behind and to one side of the back of the present day Wherry Hotel. You drive in off the roundabout, you swing round to your right, you go along past the hotel and the extension, and there's a car park on the right. If you ever go there, have a good look to the northern end of the car park, and you'll see this large bank covered in trees and bushes stretching down from Commodore Road. That's I've double checked it, and it's definitely the same place. So this is where George Mason's bowling green was located. I have a feeling that at this point, because I introduced some people to this talk, that I thought after an hour and 15 minutes, it might be a good place to finish. So if you could just click the slide, please, for me one more time, Stephen. I think it's one more time. I know we've still got, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Getting old, brain's getting tired. The Wherry Hotel, fantastic, interestingly enough, was demolished in 1899, the year after George Mason died. One of his sons took over the hotel, and they decided to demolish it. Whether it was a plan that the father, George Mason, had, that he never saw bear fruit, but it was demolished in 1899, and in January 1900, it reopened. The son, in actual fact, kept the Lady of the Lake, but he leased out the New Wherry Hotel, Oulton Broad, to Mr. Thomas Horn, a 51-year-old innkeeper who took up residence and managed the new hotel. And of course, from there on, the hotel just evolves into the one that we know today. Close look at that makes me feel I haven't quite finished building it there. It just looks a little bit unfinished, but I could be wrong. So that's really the story of what I suppose, to all intents and purposes, from the early 1800s right through to the present day, has been Oulton, then Oulton Broad, Mutford Bridge, Mutford Locks, call that area what you like. That has been the premier watering place next door to Mutford Bridge. At that point, I think I really have come to the end. If we could just flick one more slide for me.
Oh, let's bring it back in.
Yes, that is the end. That just made me just decide that was the last slide. I have put a message on there for you, I think, just to say that actually this isn't the end, but I'm going to continue again, all things being equal, and the story will continue next week. I'm sorry if it's sort of jumped about a bit, but once I start putting these things together, I sidetrack myself into little dead ends. But hopefully by this time next week, after I've done the second half, all the bits of the jigsaw will have fallen into place, and you will have you'll hopefully see Oulton Broad in a way that you've never seen it before. I hope you enjoyed it.
I certainly did, Ivan. I absolutely did. Thank you very, very much. I was fascinated by the what they call it. They call it a land bridge now, don't they? The Dogger Bank. But just how it was back then, and then and then the estuary. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you. So I'm going to do a couple of comments here. Firstly, we've got Chris Collins. Apologies, Ivan et al. I guess that's me et al. Yeah. I'm here now, but we'll catch what I've missed on video. And Chris also says, loving the new mic, Ivan, with a thumb up.
Good.
Jackie says, we have the print that Ivan showed of the Mutford lock, 5th of November, 1828. That's pretty cool. Bim Ainsley, and we know this one very well, this little guy. This information is so interesting, guys. I used to live in Oulton, but I'm really intrigued to find about the origins of Oulton Broad. Thanks, guys. Oh, yeah, the new microphone sounds awesome. A lot of comments about the new microphone. Brilliant. Karen Harris, brilliant. Loads of history I wasn't aware of. Linda Boyce says, fascinating as always. Thank you, Ivan. James Wright says, cheers. Jerry Poole, wonderful as always. Hazel Rumble, thanks, absolutely fascinating. Look forward to catching up on the 11 I've missed. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hazel, so there's a couple of ways to do that. On Facebook, all 11 are there, and you can either click on our Facebook page and then go to videos, and then you'll see them all there, or we've actually kind of collated them into a series or a playlist, if you like. And that way you can find all Ivan's videos in one place, and you know, get yourself a strong coffee and watch them all in one go, or watch them one by one. And then separately to that, and this is,
you need a strong wine. I think a strong bottle of wine rather than
something or the other. Yeah. Separately to that, we've got a separate playlist for our Tuesday sessions, which is the Shanty Sessions, and that's Paul and I, usually with special guests from all over the world. We've had people from Canada and Barcelona and Australia and America last week, America tomorrow, and those are all available to watch as well. We're a little ahead of Ivan on that. We're on episode 22, and we're on tomorrow evening. So if anybody, we'd love you to tune in 7:30 p.m. on Facebook or YouTube. There's a slightly better quality on YouTube, and that's nothing to do with any of our equipment, but Facebook downgrade anything we send out to 720p, and that's just the technical boring stuff. But yeah, Hazel, there's lots to watch, and I think you'll find all of them, all the other 11 sessions, equally as fascinating as this evening. And then David Wood says, thanks very much for all your hard work. Sue Day says, a fantastic evening again, thanks to Ivan and Stephen. Well, I won't accept that, Sue. I think it's really just Ivan. But look, while we're talking, we do like to give a little plug to this. I know it embarrasses Ivan, but he's obviously an author of many books, and there's a few that are available from, we're going to say, Waterstones in Lowestoft, especially since they give us a share. They give us a Facebook share, or failing that, Beckles Books. And if you really want it and you can't get it anywhere else, then obviously the internet is available too. But first up, we have A Trial of Witches, then George Borrow, Oulton and Beyond, A Return to Haunted Lowestoft by Ivan Bunn and Henry Baker, and then also The Trial of the Lowestoft Witches. Facts. Well, you can read that if you're watching it on screen, so I don't need to for you. Those books are all available. Copies or old copies of Ivan's books, all available from Waterstones Lowestoft. So, and I'm just going to do a couple more comments now. A few more coming in. Diana Calver. Oh, hello, Diana. And she says, many thanks, missed the start, but we'll go back and catch up. Yes, Diana, and 11 others as well, if you haven't caught those. Draper says, thank you, Ivan and Stephen, so interesting. And then Chris Collins again, interesting and very enjoyable. Many thanks. So, I mean, I think everyone's really just mirroring what I said, Ivan, which I found, I mean, I always do, but I found tonight particularly fascinating. And I guess the other thing is, which you know, people might, I guess people probably would appreciate, but I think just the amount of time that you must put into preparing those PowerPoints is phenomenal. I mean, obviously, I know that is your thing, and you're very adept at creating them and making them whiz bang, and you know, do all the whistles and bells. But still, there's a lot of time spent going into that, and it does make it feel very.
Yeah, I can honestly say, Stephen, that it is a labour of love. I love my history. In actual fact, I think I'm a PowerPoint addict, if there is such a thing. I don't know if you can get treatment for it, but I think the old adage, a picture speaks 1,000 words, speaks for itself. And so that's why I try and make them as visual and up to a point as entertaining as possible. And so I do enjoy it. And of course, a at the moment still being in isolation here, it helps me while away a little bit of the somewhat boring time at the moment. So yeah, I do enjoy doing it. I enjoy sharing the information, and so I got plenty more of these to come. And hopefully, can I just say one thing? It's an advert, really, if you like. The George Borrow Oulton, that's a limited edition. I've nearly run out of copies of them. When they go, as they say, when they're gone, they're gone. It's only available from Waterstones in Lowestoft. And although it's about George Borrow, I have tried to, and I know I've succeeded by the things that people have said. I've woven his story against the background of his time when he lived in Oulton and on the Oulton Hall estate. And if you are an Oulton person and you're interested in the background to George Borrow and the his time in Oulton and beyond, because I follow him in his journeys to a little bit as well. As I said, I'm sure you'll find the book interesting. It's not particularly expensive. I think it's under a tenner, about $8.99, I think. Plenty of pages, illustrated, and it's the result of the best part of 15 years research using a lot of primary source material, but there'll never be any more printed. Once it's gone, as they say, it's gone. It'll probably never be republished for different reasons. So they're at Waterstones. I think Waterstones have got a few in stock, and I think I've got about half a dozen left here. If Waterstones want any more, then it's the end of it.
And I'm willing to bet that, unlike QVC, when they say when we're sold out, we're sold out, I'm willing to bet that actually when these are gone, they really are gone. You're not just saying
they will be gone. Yeah, no, they will be gone. They'll never be. It'll never be republished.
Brilliant. So I think we're very fortunate actually to have a Waterstones in Lowestoft, fantastic bookshop. If you're not in Lowestoft and you'd like a copy, I'm sure if you have another Waterstones nearby you, they could transfer your copy. But any of Ivan's books, I can tell you from first-hand experience, are fascinating reads. And if there are just a few copies left, do go grab yourself one, won't you? So we're next week, Ivan, we're on to part 2, changing Oulton Broad. And yeah, so just a really another quick plug for tomorrow. Paul and I at 7:30 p.m. we will be doing the Shanty Sessions, and I guess we just have a slight preoccupation with local history as well, but through song. And we celebrate the music, the folk music that fishermen and seafarers used to sing, and occasionally we even bring in a little provenance of where they were sung locally, or some local versions. And so if you're available, even if you're not available, you can watch again, but if you are available, tomorrow night 7:30 p.m, same place, Facebook and YouTube, and Paul will be here, and we've got a wonderful group going to join us from America as well. And I'm struggling, I'm reaching out into my brain to think of the name of that group. They're called Press Gang Mutiny. That's it. Great name, great band, wonderful singers, and they're going to treat us to a song or two. So that's tomorrow night. But back to this evening, I think, as we usually do, Ivan, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll say good night, and thanks for tuning in.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Stephen. Last word from me. Just I enjoyed doing it this evening. I hope you enjoyed it, learned something from it. Thanks for tuning in and watching and supporting us. And whatever you're doing out there, take care, go well, and hopefully we'll all be together here again in a week's time. And then once I get out of this lockdown, I might be able to get back to seeing some of the people I know who watch this. Anyway, thanks once again. Take care, everybody. And I just bid you a very fond good night. Bye.